Welcome, everybody. My name's Ryan. I'm one of the pastors at Redemption Tempe, the marriage pastor. We have for a long time at Redemption Tempe tried to be there for people in the premarital space, and a lot of that has been done one-on-one over the years, and a lot of us as pastors have been able to do that. But in the last couple years, and Jake, you may be able to help with this, but like we've entered more into the gathering everybody together into one space and preparing for marriage, because there's so many topics that can come up in marriage that you can have those conversations individually, but having them communally is pretty helpful.
Totally.
So we started doing that maybe a year or two ago, something like that, would you say?
Yep.
And so the goal is to cover maybe some main areas like the meaning of marriage, spiritual compatibility, your family of origin, conflict and communication, marriage roles, finances, decision-making, stuff like that. But the last few times we've done it, we've had our sixth session has been on the story of sex and marriage, which is kind of I would say a bigger deal nowadays than it has been in the past. Not that obviously sex and marriage are supposed to go together, but it's kind of it's hard to stress the importance of that topic, and especially as it applies to our marriage, because sex in our culture has kind of hit somewhat of a fever pitch. It shapes most of life in Western culture. It's used to sell almost everything. You could use sex to sell anywhere from makeup to the soda that you drink. So you have to ask yourself the question, is this what sex is really intended for? Even concepts that we're getting more and more used to, language we've gotten more and more used to over the last maybe 20 years, is things like phrases like, you can't help who you love. Is that really true? Do you really have no decision-making capabilities in who or what you love? And does that love give you the freedom to engage those things or those people sexually? For instance, if I loved my friend's wife, do I now have a freedom and a right to have sex with her? Because I can't help who I love. That's my right. So about a month ago, we had our last session of our most recent Prepare for Marriage class. And we decided, Jake and I led this time around, we decided we're going to open it up to gain everybody's perspective in the class instead of just coming in and making statements. And the intention was to understand what their current perspective is around the narrative of sex and marriage, and then maybe talk about that from a biblical perspective. And we felt like the conversation was enlightening enough that we needed to talk more about this. So the purpose of our conversation today is maybe to help give everybody the ability to discern the difference between some of these competing stories and visions for sex and marriage versus maybe the biblical story and vision for sex and marriage. So today we got myself, Warren Williams, Jake Slobodnik.
Hey.
Welcome, fellas.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
And just going to have a conversation. So we're going to try and, have the goal to highlight some of these topics and questions and just hopefully have a good conversation. So let's just start out by saying, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but as it relates to marriage, there seems to be somewhat of a growing divide between this ceremony versus the marriage, the perfect wedding versus actually your marriage. So it's begging the question to some degree, is the ceremony more important than the actual marriage? And the reason we're applying it to this particular topic for today is, in the past, especially amongst Christians, sex used to be something that you waited for to do until you were married. Now, even culturally, that has been the case in the past, where it was commonly assumed that you have sex with somebody after you get married, and that ceremony almost delineates the recognition that we have, created this new union, and that there is a freedom to express the intimacy of sex. Let me just start by asking, do you think this is still true, or has this changed? Like, do we still equate sex and marriage together?
In society as a whole?
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, no.
Yeah.
Not in society. Not in the culture that we like swim in. I don't think.
Yeah.
So. I think that those two are separated.
Okay.
Yeah,
So.
I think too with the growth of like contraceptives and like that has become such that has had such an effect
Yes.
on sex and marriage, right? Like one of the
Yes.
big considerations
Yeah.
prior to these things existing was like, hey, if we have sex, we can have a baby,
Yeah.
and being married would put us in a lot better of a position
Yeah.
to be able to
Yeah.
care for the child. And
Yeah.
I mean, in a lot of ways with contraceptives, like that is not as much of a concern. And
Yeah.
so sex feels a lot cheaper.
Yeah. It's not consequence driven anymore.
Exactly.
In any way.
Exactly.
Yeah. And even Jake, you were saying something about this, Jake, when we were talking the other day, like if you, as a woman, if you end up carrying a child, you can your relationship with the man that you're having that child with, it changes because you can call that man to support you or to take care of you, and it forced the man to make a decision. Do
Yeah.
I want to become a man or not? Just talk a little bit.
Well, yeah,
More-
and like in line of what you were just saying, Warren, too. Prior, like to the '60s and culturally, it was something that if you want to have sex, you got to get married.
Yeah.
And so that put a lot of pressure on men because largely biologically, most of the costs for having children go on women. So the other costs that go have to be actually culturally enforced. And as culture gets more, like people get more spread out and you live in big cities and you've got contraceptives, it's not like it was 200 years ago where if someone gets pregnant and has a baby, it's going to hurt the whole community.
That's
So
right.
the entire community is like, you better step up
That's
and
right.
take care of that baby.
That's right.
Because otherwise, I'm going to have to take care of
Yeah,
the baby.
that's right.
That changes.
Yeah.
And then also it allows for kind of like an extending lack of needing to grow and mature
Yeah.
when it comes to if you want to have
Yeah.
sex, the responsibilities that go into that as a man of being able to care for a child, being able to care for a woman in those like vulnerable years.
Yeah.
That gets separated out now too. Now you can
Yeah.
have with contraceptives, you can have the experience of sex, but then also not feel like you have to have any kind of responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's so
I
interesting.
think that changes a
Yeah.
lot
Like
of
Jake,
it.
to what you're saying, it's like marriage just feels like such a high price
Mhm.
for something that can be done cheaply, and
Yep.
like why would you pay this high price? For,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now it's kind
so
of like
easy.
become like sex,
It's so
even
true.
if you take hookup culture out of the conversation and you just kind of focused on like, okay, well, sex should be done with someone you love, then sex is an expression of like connection. And then that means that marriage is irrelevant to that conversation.
Yeah.
And then what it means is that marriage then becomes kind of this like some kind of heightened romantic like pinnacle
Yeah.
that exists,
Yep.
within Bachelor Nation culture, where it's like the idea of like the greatest act of love is this ceremony of a big wedding. But
Yes.
sex falls way before that.
Yeah.
You're having sex long before that to see if you really do have this soulmate or whatever.
Mm.
So
Interesting. It's funny because Jake, you might remember this, but in our conversation, when we asked everybody in this last class, we asked this question, and they said it's very common for the current generation to just conclude that marriage doesn't work. It's failed. And this is amongst predominantly people who would identify as Christian or are pursuing Christianity. And so there's this general sense that they're more cautious to enter into marriage. So it's marriage has been boiled down to, like what you just said, compatibility and ceremony. The only thing we have left is our experiences, and we kind of build our lives around the experience. Because if you remove responsibility and maturity, what else is left?
Yeah.
It's just
That's a good point.
experience.
Yeah.
And at this point, we are told that the pinnacle of our experience is usually sexually driven.
Yep.
So it's identity driven. Everything that you do in society seems to point back to this is the ultimate. Things like soda or makeup or soap or are all promoted by this sexual pinnacle that we can all reach. And so we in asking that question, there was one of the guys, he raised his hand. He said, "I think there are two opposing worldviews on marriage." He literally said this. This is a guy that just got baptized at last time.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Last time we did. Okay.
And he said there's the covenantal and reflecting God's purpose and intention version of worldview around marriage. And then there's the institution that meets all my needs and fulfills all my desires.
Bingo.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So let's talk about this just for a second. And let's talk about what are the stories about, this is kind of going on the same line. What are the stories about sex and marriage that are currently competing with each other in our culture? And Jake, I'd love to hear a little bit of your stuff on this. What are the myths that we're being told about sex right now? So let's talk a little bit about those things.
Yeah. This is like something that I've just been noticing. Common language that is external to the faith, external to the Bible, but it's language that even within Christian communities we've begun to adopt.
Sure.
Even if we don't use explicit language, it kind of falls under that same thing. The language, and it's like a bunch of different ways to kind of describe the myth of the one, even though I increasingly hear people say, I don't believe in the one, but then we'll say some of these things anyways. One of them being that there's such a thing as chemistry, and how they use the word to describe chemistry as like emotional connection, compatibility, language of friendship. And what that myth creates is that you can find certain people you will be compatible with and certain people who are not. So it kind of perpetuates that like soulmate like myth, even though people don't say soulmate. But the idea is that marriages don't work because you hitched up with someone who was not compatible, and then too late you found out you weren't compatible later. Is often like how failed marriages are articulated to us, like generations ahead of us. Like my parents got divorced and they changed, and my dad said this is why, and my mom said this is why. And so it creates this ongoing panic within us, but in the dating phase, to make sure you find the right one, that you get everything compatible. That person needs to be, like, if you like having deep theological conversations, they better be able to hang in that same way. If you like a certain type of music and you have a very emotional experience going to electronic concerts, that person better have the exact same like enjoyment of that to that same level. You better, if you've got a relationship with your closest buddy, like friends, like guys, well then your wife or vice versa needs to be able to hang in the same exact way.
You know what it makes me think, Jake, as you describe that, I know you'll get this. It's like when you're playing a video game and you create a character, you give it the different numbers for whatever the thing is. Like, I think that's how a lot of people approach dating.
Yeah, no, for real. You got the little slider that makes their like shoulders more broad, shoulders more thin. But yeah, it's like chemistry. It's a vague word used to describe connections with other human beings over shared interests, delights, forms of communication, and ways of seeing the world, which are all really good gifts. But because human beings change, that's going to change consistently in any marriage. So that's one of the things that I've noticed. The other one, I don't know if you want me to talk about this now, but when it comes to sex, is the myth of innate sexual desire. Do you want to Like,
yeah, talk about it. Absolutely.
so I think that's one I've noticed too and it comes up more often like in conversations about attraction. So it doesn't get as explicit as talking exactly to sexuality, but it becomes up in attraction. And it kind of fits in the same category. My parents got divorced. I want to make sure I find the perfect one that meets all the check boxes. Therefore, if I believe that I'm a 7, I better find someone who's a 7 or an 8. Like I'm got to be pushing like an 8 because and so you got these people who are deciding whether or not they want to date or be married based off of attraction, but communicating attraction as if it's an innate thing, something that is immutable. It doesn't change. You're just attracted to whoever you're attracted to.
Yeah.
Which is a very big cultural myth. I think that's something that people just assume.
Yeah.
But the joke I always tell people and ask is like, well, I mean, Ryan, honestly, like, how old were you when you got married?
26.
26. How old are you right now?
50.
50. Okay. So when you're 26, did you think that the pinnacle of the most beautiful woman would be a 50-year-old woman? But I would
Definitely
hope
not.
for the sake of the intimacy of your marriage that now that's the case.
You know what's crazy is I mean, just because my daughter got married this last weekend, and my wife had to get a brand new dress, mother of the bride dress, everything. Man, I literally thought to myself, I think she might be more beautiful than the day I married her.
Come on.
Yep.
I mean,
Come on.
I legitimately thought that. Like, how is that possible?
Yeah.
Has my mind changed? Have I changed? Or like, because she is more beautiful to me than the day we got married.
And I think what we're describing, how God intended desire to work. Did he intend it to be this innate thing that you have to discover within your soul? It's immutable, unchangeable, and you got to find someone who you're so attracted to that it will carry you into your 80s? Or is desire and attraction something that responds to commitment, to sacrificial love, service? Because if that's true, which I believe it absolutely is, then a healthy marriage can actually carry a healthy desire and healthy sexuality, and you can cultivate it like you would a garden.
Come on, man. Come on, dude. That is so good. And I think it even makes me think back to your question around the ceremony or the marriage, like what you're actually pouring more into. It's like the ceremony isn't the pinnacle of your marriage.
No.
Yeah.
Right? Like there are new heights that you don't even know God's going to take you to as you commit to this person.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I love
It's
it.
kind of the myth
I
that
love
like
it.
that's going to be the day you're most attracted to your spouse. It should be the day you're least attracted.
least attracted to your spouse.
Like if you're doing it right, like and that is really beautiful
For
and fun
sure.
memories. But
For sure.
I think back on it and I adored that moment and I thought my wife was so absolutely beautiful. But I think back on myself and I go, I didn't know anything about her.
Exactly.
It was, it was,
totally.
and now it's something that's built on, a decade of connection, service, love for one another, growing, sharing like different things, going through suffering. So I think that's one of the myths that I see is kind of really assumed in a lot of people. And then it gets in the way. And I'm like noticing people actually like even pass over potential people who love Jesus desperately.
Yeah.
They're really awesome, like, within the community, but they don't hit, maybe I think I'm a 7, but they're like a 6 and like, and I think it's just nonsense. Like you cultivate desire and attraction.
That is so countercultural.
Yeah, absolutely.
To cultivate your desire. It reminds me, I think Tim Keller said it in his marriage book. He said your vows on your wedding day are not a statement of your current love, but a commitment of your future love. I think that's fascinating because you're saying, I'm committing to be this way to you in 30 years from now.
Yep.
Because right now it's easy. I feel it.
Yep.
Right.
You look a certain way. We're young. We're hopeful, whatever. But I'm going to spend the next 20 or 30 years cultivating what that means.
Yep.
That's a big deal.
So good.
So, well, let me ask this question. I'm just I'm even gonna jump ahead of where I was originally gonna go. So, like, let's keep expanding a little bit on if there's more reasons. You mentioned this a minute ago, and I'll bring it up. What are some of the reasons, or some more of the reasons, we don't equate sex and marriage to each other? Now, you brought up the birth control, and stuff like that. Like, are there any other reasons in our current cultural narrative, or maybe over the last number of years, why we're having trouble equating sex and marriage to each other, would you say?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's a big one. I also think, like, we aren't removed from the effects of the sexual revolution of, was it the 60s, 70s, that time period where, there's this pushback against a lot of these structures and stuff around sex. Yeah. And it's like, I think we've kind of named this already. Like, if you feel it, it's good, right? And so, like, why would you go through all the hoops of marriage and all that's required there, when you could just go out and have sex with another willing person? And so marriage feels like this antiquated, old world structure that's just unnecessary to just two physical bodies coming together for both people's gratification.
Yeah. Hey, yeah.
We've almost, I mean, for what you're saying, we've almost replaced commitment or responsibility with consent.
Yeah, absolutely.
As long as there's consent, anything is okay.
Anything goes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, too, we've plucked it out of the context. I mean, we're real, like, historically, like, removed from this now, but it's been a progression of, you plucked it out of the context of, it is no longer institute of God and his act of creation. It is now what's left over, and these are still parts of it, but what's left over is it's an institution of the state to provide flourishing for the community, which it is that still, but that's what's left over. And then the other thing that's left over is it's a pinnacle expression of romantic intimacy, and it is still that. Yeah. But when those things are like surprisingly flimsy. Now, I think a lot of people think that they might not be when they're getting into it. Like, our romance will live on forever. And it's like, you're going to find days where you don't like each other. So if that's what's holding it there, you'll have an affair. Yeah. You'll get a divorce, which happens rampantly. Yeah. And then we look to people who are married for 80 years and we go, gosh, you must have loved each other every day. And that's just how it, and you go back to the compatibility myth. I picked the wrong person, or they weren't meant to be. Not recognizing that those are just two people who actually let the marriage covenant, commitment, hold them together. But I think we've snatched it out of the, like, God made it, God says so thing, which then has power. I mean, it's got gas to be able to make us go, I'm staying with this. God has brought this together. So I think we've run out of that.
And I think once you pluck it from there, I think you can get to a point, which is what we see a lot today, is you have pornography that is pervasive, right? And it almost becomes, I don't even need another person.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's just about my satisfaction, my personal fulfillment.
Yeah.
Pornography then fills the void there. And so, I think that's another big factor that I think we'd be really miss if we didn't name.
Yeah. Sex becomes an appetite.
It's an appetite.
Is what it happens.
Right. Yes. It is. I mean, and you were saying this a minute ago, but, like, Jake, you were saying, even Warren, are we required to act on our feelings and our emotions? Are we required to do that? Is there some, like, if I have these internal stirrings, you have to do something about that. You have to take action on that, or it can't just be something that's fleeting that goes past. I'll give a for instance. Yeah. So years back, I was going on a car ride up north with some friends on a retreat, right? And I get in the car, and a hypothetical question is posed. And the hypothetical question is, hey, there's a guy, he's in his early 50s, and his wife has early onset Alzheimer's. She's in her late 40s. Really, really sad, hypothetical, right? She's had it for a couple years, and she's getting to the point where she can't really engage him intimately. She forgets who he is. She forgets what she's doing most of the day. She's starting to have, care all day long. Sure. And the question is posed, would it be okay for him to start having sex with other women because he has needs. To which I give a hypothetical answer of, I won't say what I said, but no, you know, and I said it emphatically, and it was met with like, in the car, it was met with like, whoa, that's strong, and you know, whatever. And then they were like, well, actually, it's so-and-so. And it was the guy that I knew, and this was a real story.
They set you up there, huh?
Yeah, they set me up. This is when I learned to not answer hypothetical questions as if, you know, like, for whatever.
Yeah.
And I realized, like, okay, we can have this conversation, and obviously when you know somebody and you're talking to them, you're going to talk to them a different way because you want to love them and everything. But the question that's really being asked is, he's made a commitment or a covenant to a person. Are these needs and desires that he have okay to exercise those because they're not accessible to him?
Yeah.
For you know, you posed this question to me the other day, like, what if you have a guy who's married and his wife has trouble bleeding for years, and it takes away the ability for them to have sex for a period of time. Well, he has desires and needs, like, can't he just go fulfill those? Like, these are somehow have become disassociated from each other. You know?
Yeah.
And that's the real, to me, that's the real tension that is going on. And Warren, you brought up, you know, the sexual revolution. I think we've seen this movement in the last 60, 70 years where you go from a strong sexual revolution to we could do whatever we want to, right? Then you have the onset of purity culture, which is kind of a reaction to the sexual revolution. Then you have this cognizance of, like, all these sexually transmitted diseases, and then the genesis of AIDS in all these, you know, communities that are having rampant sex with each other, and it's starting to pop up. And really, AIDS at the time was a guaranteed death sentence.
Absolutely, yeah.
So sex becomes not only illicit, but, like, now you're scared of what could happen to you, so you should stop doing it. Like, now we have these tensions that are going on where it's like, oh, you have the freedom, but that freedom causes all, like, how do, you know, you get into birth control and pornography, and there's no consequence because you could do whatever you want to and solve it, or you could do whatever you want to and you don't need anybody.
Yeah.
What?
Man, I just think there's something so interesting about that, and this just came to me, and so hopefully it's not half-baked and nonsensical, but like, I feel like actually what society tells you about sex and, like, what is the ultimate pinnacle, which is meet your own needs, whatever you feel, whenever you feel it, like, that is actually, like, the thing that makes us less human.
Yes.
If we pursue it, that makes us more like the animal kingdom, right? Because that's what animals do. Like, the things that actually make us most human, fully human, which is, I believe, why, one of the big reasons why God, like, has these boundaries around sex, because that's what he's aiming to bring us towards, right? Like, actually what makes us more human are the places where we say, we feel this, but we won't do it.
Yeah.
And you apply that across the board.
Yes.
I really don't like this person. I want to punch him in the face.
Yeah.
I won't do it.
Yes.
Right? Like, an animal doesn't make that decision.
Yeah.
That's a threat, I attack.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think take it out of the context of sexuality and just for, like, what the world says. I mean, it says a lot of things, but what the narrative of the Bible teaches us is that your desires, every single one that you have, is to be submitted to the Lordship of Jesus, no question. And then you got to tangle out is sex a need? It's not a need.
It's not a need.
Intimacy is a need.
That's right.
That's a human need. Yeah. But sex is one expression of intimacy that God intended in the context of marriage that can do a lot of, like, good blessing things in that context. but it's not a need. And when you treat it like a need, then you absolutely can make arguments for, hey, if if my wife and I can't have sex in this season, then it's kind of permissible. And it's, intimacy is a need. Like, we cannot live as human beings without intimacy.
Yeah.
You can live without sex.
Yeah. Like, when you make your vows, you don't covenant to, like, have sex in every season.
Yeah.
Right? You
Absolutely.
covenant to love each other, come what may, to be committed to each other, come what may.
Yeah.
And so, of course, sex is great. And, every married couple, it's like a gift. It's a gift from God. But, like, if something happens in a season, like Jake said, it's not a need.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this skips ahead of what you're talking about or what you're thinking of going, Ryan, but I remember within that conversation asking people what they thought about what the Bible said about sex and reading the passage in 1 Corinthians where it says, the husband shall fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife her husband. The wife does not have authority over her body, but yields it to her husband. And in the same way, the husband does not have authority over his body, but yields it to his wife. And even just articulating, because I think we've maybe heard that passage, but what he is saying there is that the direction of sexuality in marriage that God intends is my entire sexuality, my desires, my wants, my needs, like what feels good, is to be directed entirely towards the service of my spouse, and to consider my own sexuality as a tool of loving service.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if it's not that, if it's like need, or then you're kind of like using each other to fulfill needs, versus if it is that perspective of this is for the context of service, it absolutely gets rid of so many problems that people run into.
Absolutely.
Within marriage and outside of marriage. It cuts around all that stuff, cuts around abuse, because you at no point can you articulate any form of abuse as, you can say it as I'm fulfilling my needs. You can't do it as I am trying to serve my spouse.
That's right.
And so I think that's I've been surprised at how few people have read this part of the passage or understand what it's articulating. Is a total flip from our culture, from I have needs, and even in the most most positive light that I could say within the culture of do it within marriage only and really be committed, it still is I have needs and you are a part of fulfilling them. You need to fulfill them. We might even make a promise to fulfill them for each other. But the scripture flips it and goes, no, we're not talking about your needs.
Right.
Your body belongs to your spouse for their service.
It's huge.
That is,
it's huge.
Again, just hearing you talk about it that way, and we did talk about it in the class, it's so foreign of a concept to think about it from that perspective. That you think if it's not fulfilling my needs, but it's a service to the other person, you almost get well, how am I supposed to enjoy it?
Right.
Then, this is something I'm doing for another person or whatever. It's not about fulfilling a desire.
It's not about you.
Whatever. It's so opposite.
Absolutely.
It's so opposite that it's almost like I don't have a category for that. I'm being reoriented to something that you go, I've never really thought about it like that. Or I've never heard about it like that. And it changes your concept of intimacy too, because intimacy is not based on getting my needs fulfilled or met or whatever. It's based on surrendering myself to something completely.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. It's a total flip of categories.
Yes. So, and just that concept alone, we could probably just, if we ended it right here, it would be well, that's the whole point. But I do want to talk. Did you have something you wanted to add? Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Am I too far away?
Yeah, you were a bit.
Sorry. Jose's probably looking at you. Move that mic closer to his mouth. Sorry. So here's I'm gonna, I don't know if I'm gonna change tunes or not, but we had this conversation in the class too. I asked this question. if you could live together, share all of your finances together, make decisions together, have sex with each other before getting married, what is the purpose of getting married? Let me ask it a different way. If we're thinking about, like, people are already doing all of those things, then what is the sacred thing that we're holding on to waiting before marriage? Like, and I'm asking you to think about this from a cultural perspective right now, because in a second we're going to get to what Jake was talking about. We're going to start looking at it from like more of the biblical perspective. But so take a cultural view. You're just a person listening to this who's, thinking about following Christ or doesn't, or maybe is just hearing it from the outside. I'm doing all these things. What's sacred to me? What am I saying? Oh, this is the difference between being married and not being married.
I mean, just on the surface, outside of a biblical perspective, there aren't many things that would prevent you from,
which is why culture is functioning that way.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the only, if I'm taking, like, what would be something that, I'm not a Christian, or I'm exploring Christianity, and I'm thinking about this, like, maybe it would be, it makes our relationship a little more secure by the sense of, like, if we are investing together or, combining all these things together, it gives us a little bit more of a security in some way. But I don't even know, so a lot of people wouldn't even want that, because what this allows for is 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Yeah. And that feels comfortable to a culture that, is afraid of the things that is, like, the Bible actually calls you to as a part of a covenant. So to me, there's not many reasons. I'd love to hear if you can think of any, Jake.
I mean, I think you're right. I think the only thing that maybe within it would be, it keeps the relational eject button available.
Yeah.
I think even from a secular, like, outside of the church standpoint, if it doesn't mean anything, then my, like, challenge would be, then why aren't you doing it? Like, it means something. That's why people hesitate to get married.
Sure.
Even if you're not even talking about Christianity. It is, you are tying yourself, and it might be they don't want to tie themselves fully in the way socially, like, people perceive them as married or not, regardless of what people say of, like, we're married, and, like, in our eyes, like, nobody around you looks at you as married. When you have little kids and grandkids run around, nobody calls you uncle or grandpa. They call you like, oh, you're Johnny, the guy who's married to my aunt. Like, that's like, so I think, and that's not even in Christianity. That's outside.
Totally.
Outside, we still culturally know that there is something sacred, even if we don't call it sacred, about making a covenant commitment. Or maybe the reasoning is some of the legal reasons. And I think that still, too, is like, it means something. You are keeping an eject button. For whatever reason, you don't want to unite your life in that area.
Absolutely.
So culturally, it's, how many of our areas can I unite our lives together to get the benefits while maintaining an eject button where I could tear it back out whenever I want?
Absolutely. So, funny story. A couple months ago, one of my friends from childhood, he was actually in town, and he was dating this girl at the time. And, I was dropping him back at the airport, and we're having this conversation because, or actually, I didn't know this, but on the car ride back to the airport, he reveals that him and his girlfriend are polyamorous. Okay. Right? And so, that just means that they have an open relationship, right? And I'm trying to, like, talk to him and convince him of, like, man, I don't think that's going to work. And he's like, no, like, we both do our own thing. And, and we've been dating for a while. And, maybe we'll get married one day, but we really like the freedom. And it was just funny because months later, he's still not a Christian. But months later, he called me and he was like, yeah, you know what? You were right, man. And, I mean, he ended up actually just this last week proposing to a girl.
Wow.
And they're going to get married.
Wow.
And I think the reason that he was naming was like, man, there's something about legacy that just comes with marriage. There's something about like the security of knowing a person is always going to be there for you. And so that is one recent non-Christian perspective that I heard. That
thanks for sharing that.
Cool.
That's actually really good.
It was cool to see the whole journey of that.
Yeah, it always means something to people. Otherwise, people wouldn't like do it. And there's always a hesitation, of being like, well, we're not gonna get married because we don't need that. It's like, well, what do you not need then?
Exactly.
You know, because
I think to some degree it can be that people end up saying we're gonna get married because it's experience driven. That's the one experience I haven't had. I don't know what it feels like to be married to another person.
That's a good point.
You know? Just think of some of the, some celebrities that they get older in life, especially, you see women who have been super famous, made tons of money, and the only experience they have left is I need to have a child because I haven't ever had that experience. So there's this need to go out and either have a child or adopt a child so that they can know what that experience. They've adopted everything the world has given them, and it still isn't quite enough, And even, I don't know if this is another side of it, but Jake, I wrote something down you said the other day that I thought was really a good point.
Oh, I hope it's all right.
You said in reference to this thought process, my greatest identity fulfillment will come in finding a partner that completes me, and this will solve my loneliness problem. So to some degree, we like you're saying, Warren, we're so lacking that security, and we think if we can obtain that security, this will actually solve that I'm lonely.
Yeah.
And even I think, John pointed this out in one of his sermons, I don't know, a month or two ago, that loneliness is such an epidemic at this point that health-wise, it's like the equivalent of smoking like 15 or 16 cigarettes a day, to which I leaned over to my wife and said, I'm going to start smoking again because I'll be healthier than half of society. I just smoke 10 cigarettes a day and I'll be better off than everybody else,
Don't think it works that way, but...
the things people take away.
That's just like a lesson in sermons.
That was
You're
my
like, you think
takeaway
that they
from the
heard
sermon,
like the loneliness part. What they actually heard was, oh my gosh, I should start smoking.
I just thought I forgot until that moment how much I missed smoking.
Oh man.
So,
all right, Ron,
Thanks,
we have
John
another podcast to do.
No, I think that's a pretty valuable point to make, that it almost ensures you're buying an insurance policy on the concept of not being lonely.
Yeah, against loneliness.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you get married and find that you will still have to face
Yes.
what is the heart of the loneliness problem.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
And it's so good that you named that, because I think one of the questions I always have with celebrities who are getting married multiple times, I'm like, why is that? Why are they doing that? That doesn't make any sense. Why don't you just
not be married?
not be married?
Yeah.
But it's like, you're right. They're chasing that experience over and over. They're chasing that fulfillment of the loneliness over and over and over. And so that makes a lot of sense of that.
Yes. Yeah. I was listening to an interview of a celebrity that we would all know, and this person was on their, I believe, third or fourth marriage. And it was actually very fascinating, because they said, I finally, after these 3 or 4 whatever it was, realized what I needed from somebody. And I realized I can't be married to somebody that doesn't fulfill this need. And I finally found somebody that's willing to fulfill that need.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, you just straight up named what you had been chasing after. And right now, they think they've found it. But it's 2 years in. So, like, you don't really know. Like, in 3 years, you might go, you don't do that anymore, and I'm going to chase the next experience or desire. And so, let's unless you have something else.
There. No, it's just there's so much there, but keep going.
Okay, podcast
so let's
2.
Let's switch gears.
Okay.
And move it into maybe let's go down the line of what the Scripture says about marriage and sex and its purposes, and maybe help invite people into something better.
Sure.
So let's just ask a basic question. This is going to be a short answer, but we just want to start with, who created sex and marriage?
God.
Okay.
Right answer.
Okay, right
Did
answer.
I pass?
The youth group answer, Jesus.
Jesus.
Why is this such a big deal to answer? I'll say it from this perspective. I'm sure you guys have had this conversation, but it's worth saying. You understand that when you get married, you are entering into an institution that God created. You are not creating that institution. You are entering into something that has already been established by somebody. This is a scary proposition because we are taught that when you get married, it's my marriage, and we can define it how we want to. That's not actually true. I mean, I had this conversation yesterday with somebody, and it was almost shocking to them. Like, we understand that when you do this, this is already invented by somebody. And I posed the question that you said, and I think it also shocked them, being a pastor. I said, I don't understand why you're getting married. You should just not get married. You already live your best life. If you don't agree with what marriage is, don't get married. And they literally looked at me and said, I thought you were going to tell me like I had to get married because that's the right thing to do. Actually, you should understand what you're doing ahead of time because God is actually the one that invented.
That's right.
Like, isn't it weird to say God invented sex? Like, it's just
It shouldn't be weird.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be weird, right? But we view it as like God and sex are like
we
somehow
invented something that he was like, oh, dang it, I didn't think that they could do that.
Exactly. Like God is some prude that is against pleasure and is against fulfillment or any whatever equation we put onto sex, because we've just oriented sex into the wrong perspective.
And that's some of the shortcomings of what you mentioned, of purity culture. That's what it did.
Exactly.
Right? And so, like we have allowed the culture and society abroad to take ownership of sex. And we've just told people like what's bad about it versus like what God has actually invented it for.
Yes.
So the beautiful part of it. So
okay, so
it's good.
What would be the context for sex? In what context did God create sex for?
Go ahead.
Oh,
Warren.
sorry. I was just looking at Jake.
We're waiting.
I'm looking at the pastor in the room.
He created it to be expressed within the boundaries of a covenantal relationship. And we would say that's within marriage, right? To be expressed in what Jake hit on earlier in a sacrificial, service-oriented way towards the other person, towards your spouse. I even think about Ephesians chapter 5, that verse, that passage in Scripture we often like to refer to when it comes to marriage. And the instructions to the man is to love your wife as your own flesh, your wife's flesh as your own flesh, right? So we see that all throughout.
Yep.
And I think that leads to the last one of loving another as myself.
Yep.
Yeah.
That, and I would throw on there and add too, the context of male and female as a reflection of God's image bearer. Like in Genesis language, God created male and female, and then he brings them together. You've got the image of God reflected in the uniqueness of what it means to be male and female. But then in the context of covenant, he's bringing the two different together. So I think that would be, covenant, sacrificial service, love like Christ, male and female.
It's funny how that equates, and the next question will be the purpose of sex. Like the biblical vision for sex. But it's funny you say that because, like, if you read Ephesians, he equates the marriage covenant to Christ and the church. But what's interesting about the diversity of the church is Ephesus was a city that was filled with Jews and Gentiles, and it was a very spiritually charged city.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
People were making money off of idols and demonic activity and all that kind of stuff. And he's saying in that city, I'm getting chills in my body just thinking about this. He is creating the church to be those two different and separate things coming together as one in Christ.
Amen.
Just that alone should make you realize God is not after sameness.
Yeah.
He is after two different and possibly sometimes opposite and offensive things coming together to create something brand new that is unified in Christ. Just that alone should be like, if you're not bought in at that point, that the reality of that kind of covenant is it costs you your life.
Amen.
Yeah.
You cannot hold on to your old life anymore. You give it up.
That's right.
For all your desires, your fulfillments, your everything, because there's something so much greater.
Yep.
Anyway, you were going to say.
I was just going to say, because it reflects it is easy to love yourself. Yeah. That's why Jesus says, like, loving your, it's assumed. You know how to love yourself. Or maybe another way to put it, people who are extremely like you are easier to get along with than people who are not like you. So in the context of what God designed for marriage, by nature, it forces you to relate and love someone different than yourself.
That's right.
Even though a lot of times what we try to do, even in the midst of looking for a spouse, is find someone as close to me as possible.
That's right.
Then you get married and find out that this person's going to be different no matter what. But so it's irrelevant. But then you began your relationship with a heart attitude of, let me find someone who's as close to me as possible.
Yep.
And so that heart posture sets you up for failure in marriage rather than going, this will be a stranger to me in every way as another human, and I will have to learn actively, sacrificially, how to love someone not like me.
Yeah.
It is ironic. We are taught that you're looking, like you guys are saying, for somebody that's the same as me, that's compatibility.
Yeah.
That's compatible. But spiritual compatibility is different. It's two opposites looking to focus on something greater than themselves.
Yeah.
That's what spiritual compatibility is. So if you are wanting to find a spouse, the number one thing that you focus on is, does that person focus on Christ and his purposes, or do they focus on themselves and or me?
Right.
And what I can bring to them.
Yeah.
Because if you find somebody that's just looking for that, this is redundant, but fulfilling your desires and your needs, it won't actually happen.
Right.
That's the. I mean, burst in everybody's bubble, but like that just won't.
Yeah.
You're never ever going to find it.
Yeah.
So just in some of this, I'm going to ask this next question. Some of it will be redundant, but what is the purpose or the biblical vision for sex? Just because some of it we've already said. Yeah. But let's just what does the Bible actually say? This is the purpose for sex. Just say some of
Rattle
those.
them off.
Yeah.
I would like to say enjoyment is a part of it. You know what? I like to say that because, I mean, I know, procreation is often the first thought. And of course, like that is the first main reason. And we know it's important. But I think one that gets minimized often, especially within the church, sadly, is the enjoyment. Like this is a way that God is designed for you and your spouse to truly enjoy, to know each other at the deepest level, and like, man, like that's a part of it. Like God takes joy in that.
Yes.
If it's not fun, you're doing something wrong.
Something wrong,
like it should bring joy and
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I mean, it is life bringing.
Right.
It unifies you together, and then out of that union can come new life and children.
That's right.
Yeah.
Joy. It's a part of the act of covenant making. It's a part of serving one another. It's an act of worship. I've heard it said it's like a way of saying your covenant vows all over again. Every time in the act of sex, you are with the act of your bodies, your emotions, and what you say. That act is, in a sense, reenacting the reality, you and no other.
Yeah.
And so it's like having your wedding ceremony again and again, because you are in that moment saying, "This is only you and me."
Yeah. Like sex, we talked about this in the class too. Sex is not only supposed to be covenant making, but covenant
renewing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's almost like I think it's in Luke 10, something like that. Jesus says, "Take up your cross and die daily."
Die daily.
You know. Now, I'm not, obviously, sex is not taking up your cross and dying daily, but it is that there is a consistent renewal with the same person over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and thinking about what you were saying, like, gotta make sure to say that, like, it's pleasurable and joyful, because when we talk about the act of serving, often we pit those against each other. And the only reason we do that is because culture does that. That's not actually the biblical vision. Jesus says it is a greater to give than it is to receive. And so the kingdom vision is that, not that you need to like serve, but then also make sure you get some of your joy. Like, that's not what it says. It's rather your greatest joy, fulfillment, pleasure, ecstasy will be in serving the other person with your body. Now, if that's not necessarily people's experience, which often it can't be, it's because you have practiced another reality.
That is
You've never actually learned a life of my joy comes from serving and watching the delight of another happen.
That is so good. Like, oh man, Jake, drop a bomb there if we have a sound effect. It's so good. Like, it's not the carrot at the end of the stick, man. It's like right there in the midst of it, man.
Because
like,
it's subtle. It's
really
like, you serve me and I'll serve you, right? And that's not at all what it is, because then it's not service. It's, I will serve you, and actually my greatest joy will be watching you be served.
We can, if we wanted to. I know you got some more, Ryan. We can end it right there. That's so good, man.
Why don't we just end it right there? I mean, like we could keep talking about the same thing, but I think there are moments of conclusion.
Man.
And I think that if we were to say, you know, we're trying to answer the questions of like the competing stories and visions around sex versus God's and the scripture's story and vision for sex, I think we did conclude that, in that it boils down to, does your life revolve, because God's life does revolve around this, giving of yourself to another person, and your pleasure truly comes from that type of service.
Absolutely.
To the most intimate needs that we have, and at times the most intimate desires that we have, God is actually saying you achieve those in that instead of taking them for yourself.
Yes.
You know?
Absolutely.
So, all right. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Probably needs a part 2 at some point.
Let's do it.
Yeah,
Part 2.
We should do that.
So wait around for part 2.
Yep.
Sounds good.
The end.
It's good. Dude, I think